Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Vinyl Den, your channel for record collecting by record collectors. I'm Nick. Today, I'm talking about something that's gotten kind of popular over the last several years, and that's deluxe albums. There's a bunch of links down below. You got links for the Vinyl Den Facebook group, for the merch page, for the Spotify and Apple Music playlist that I put together every week, and the Patreon page. So make sure you check all that out. Like always, if you enjoyed the episode, make sure you give me a thumbs up, hit that subscribe button down below, and make sure you hit that notification bell so you're notified every time I release new episodes. So deluxe albums have been around for a very long time. I think really over the last, I'd say 4 or 5 years, they've been getting more and more popular. And for the longest time, I didn't have an issue with a lot of these deluxe editions that came out. I actually own quite a few of them. But I think that, the more I see these come out, the more I get this feeling that it's just really honestly just a cash grab. And don't get me wrong, I think there are some out there that have some good value and have some really good extra content on there. But I think a lot of these are just, the artist put out, actually a lot of times probably just the label actually putting these out. And just a couple extra songs on there and just really kind of charging a premium for their product. So if you're a big fan of an album, you're going to keep continually buying the same album over and over again, just as long as they keep cranking out a new edition of it with, bonus tracks on there or extra live material, some kind of extra content you're getting on there. How many times you're going to keep buying that same album over and over again. But I think there's kind of a difference between like a standard, like super deluxe box set and a lot of the other deluxe editions we've been seeing come out over the last several years. Because there's this growing trend where if you're a band, you release an album, and then about or within the next year, you're releasing a deluxe edition with an extra 2 or 3 tracks on there, just kind of pile on the sales numbers on the original album. And I think in most cases, a lot of those extra bonus tracks tend to be stuff that would probably have been better left just on the cutting room floor. I've also seen quite a few releases over the last few years where instead of having extra tracks or 3 or 4 extra tracks on the album that weren't on the original release, a lot of times they're just releasing these albums with demo tracks on there. And that's something that, I get it. If you're a huge fan of an album or a huge fan of the band, it's kind of cool to sometimes listen to kind of the construction of those tracks. But the more I think about these albums, especially buying them on vinyl, I have to think to myself, really, even though I might love an album, how many times am I really going to listen to those demo tracks? And in most cases, I prefer the studio track over the demo. But I guess that's the one good thing about streaming services today is, if you want to have a deluxe edition, a lot of times the extra content will eventually make its way to a streaming service, but not always. Sometimes it's just CD or vinyl exclusive, or sometimes it's even like you got to go to the artist's website and buy the digital version of the album to get those extra tracks. I think a big glaring example of this is when Blink-182 released One More Time back in 2023. They released the standard album, and then I think within the week of releasing the album, they released a digital-only version of that album, which had 2 extra tracks on there, but the only way to get to listen to those 2 tracks was to buy that digital-only album. And then for everyone that bought that digital version, within, I think it was probably a month or two, those extra 2 tracks were on streaming services anyway. So it's really just a way to inflate those original sales numbers because you've got all these people that are buying, the album on CD and vinyl, and then buying a digital version of that album. And all that kind of goes back to, adding on to the original sales number. So when you release an album, you're almost like you're forcing your fans to buy that same album 2 or 3 different times. But a lot of the deluxe albums, they only have maybe 2, maybe 3, 4 tracks tops on them. But there are some deluxe editions out there, like that One More Time from Blink-182, where the deluxe edition, when it finally fully got released, had an additional 8 tracks on there, plus the 2 digital-only tracks. So that's an extra 10 tracks. It kind of leads to this like big, bloated, long album. I think something else that's kind of led us to the point we're at now is, it's expensive, to put out a big box set for an album. A lot of people out there really don't want to drop, $150, $200 plus on a box set for just one album. So they'll release this deluxe edition, have like 1 extra LP in there with some extra content on there. So they're getting more from that album, more of the content from that album, but they're not having to charge like this really high price for it. Another issue that I have with these deluxe editions is sometimes when you add in these extra tracks and like put it all in as one album, you kind of dilute the overall meaning or the overall message of the album, and it kind of disrupts the flow of the music across the entire album. And yes, in most instances they're just taking those extra tracks and putting them on at the end, but I'm gonna kind of harp on that to Blink-182 album for a little bit. They took those 2 digital only tracks and like inserted them in the middle of the album. And then, yes, the other 8 tracks they put on the end, but it does kind of change the feel of the later part of that album. Of course, this is all really subjective. Of course, if you love an album, you don't really care, just as long as you're getting extra material, you'll buy that album. And I think that's what a lot of bands and labels really kind of hope for. Because I'd love to see some data behind that. I'm sure it's really hard to find there. There probably isn't any data out there to track any of this. But, how many people buy the original album and then compare that to how many people buy the deluxe edition a year later. But the one thing I will give Blink-182 credit for, when they released the deluxe edition of One More Time, there were 2 different versions of it available. I ended up going and buying the 2 LP version. It comes with the standard album. It comes with the extra material. But there's a 1 LP version of this also where you can just buy just those 10 extra tracks. So, I do give them credit for offering that to people that don't want to have to buy the entire album again. And I have realized that there is one kind of deluxe edition album that I do enjoy, and I do love picking them up, and that is if they come with extra live material. Especially when you're talking about bands from the 70s and 80s where, honestly, all these years later, if those bands are still touring, they don't sound anything like they did, decades ago. So I guess I don't really see those as a cash grab, because I feel like the albums that were released decades ago, re-releasing them with the additional live material, I don't think is as much of a cash grab as releasing an album now and then a year later releasing another version of that album with some extra tracks on there. So I guess it's kind of a double-edged sword. And I guess, the more I think about it, I see both sides of it. Yes, you are getting some extra material that wasn't included on the original album, but a lot of the times it just doesn't live up to what the original release was. But something else I didn't really think about either is if you've got this big, long, almost like bloated track listing, especially nowadays when people listen to most of their music through streaming, it's a lot easier to just start skipping over a lot of the tracks on the album if the album is, an hour plus long. And also kind of sticking with streaming, if you've got different versions of the same album on there, it can get kind of cluttered and get kind of confusing. And also streaming music is really kind of algorithm based. So if you've got, 2 or 3 different versions of the same album, and, I think it's hard for the algorithm to figure out what is popular if you're spreading that same listening out over multiple different versions. Because ultimately, I think a lot of it is just a marketing ploy. It's just a way to add to sales numbers, really without having to sit down and create this whole new album, and kind of start the whole process over again. Because that's kind of the issue I had with the One More Time Deluxe Edition, is if you're going to put out 10 tracks, just put out a whole new album. You can take those same 10 tracks, call it something else, not rehash it and do a whole nother version of that first album. Because even if the intent isn't to, fleece your fans of even more money, that's kind of the way it comes off to, at least to me it does. Well, that's all I got for you today, guys. Thanks for checking the show out. Drop me a comment down below. I'd love to know what you guys think of this, because like I said earlier, I can kind of see both sides of it. I see a lot of instances where this is just a cash grab, but I do see some value in some of these deluxe editions. Because if you really love an album, it's great to get some additional content and also kind of keep the band's momentum going from the time they release an album, kind of bridging them from that album to the next release. And a lot of times that those extra bonus tracks you're getting, they are different style-wise from the original album. Sometimes they're a little more experimental. Sometimes there's a different mixing on those bonus tracks and what's on the original album. So there is some other content. So like I said, I do see some benefit to some of those releases. But it all kind of goes back to how big of a fan you are of that album, if you really think it's really worth the value, or if there is value there for you to pick up another copy of the album. And let me know what you guys think. Like always, if you enjoyed the episode, make sure you give me a thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button down below. That's all I got. Until next time, keep on spinning. Peace.